me. I love me. I don't know about you, but baby, I love me. Now everybody say, oh, I love me. I love me.
They gon' say all kinds of things. They'll make jokes about my name. They gon' try to clip my wings, but I'm gon' fly. They'll try to play me like a game. I bet they're too scared of the fame, but I can see it clear when I'm looking in the mirror saying, God, baby, just right.
I love me. I love me. I don't know about you, but baby, I love me. Now everybody say, oh, I love me. I love me. 'Cause I'm sexy and it ain't my fault. I ain't waiting on nobody's call. You don't want me, baby, that's your loss. I'll be fine.
I'll be fine,
And you can tell by the way I talk. And you can tell by the way I walk. That
I can see it clear when I'm looking in the mirror saying, God, baby, just right.
oh, I love me. I love me. I don't know about you, but baby, I love me. Now everybody say,
Come on.
oh, I love me. I love me.
That's right. Say.
I don't mean to brag, I don't mean to boast. I love all y'all, but I love me the most.
I don't mean to brag, I don't mean to boast. I love all y'all, but I love me the most. Go raise a glass, give yourself a toast. I love all y'all, but I love me the most. I don't mean to brag, I don't mean to boast. I love all y'all.
But I love me.
I love me.
I love me.
I love me.
I don't know about you,
I don't know about you.
baby, I love me.
Baby, I love me.
Now everybody say,
Hey, hey,
I love me.
I love me.
I love me.
Everybody say,
I love me.
oh,
Do you love you?
yes, I do. Me too.
Thank you guys so much. That's my time. Roll the windows up. We're not smoking.
If I could write you a song to make you fall in love, I would already have you up under my arm. I used up all of my tricks, I hope that you like this, but you probably won't. You think you're cooler than me. You got designer shades just to hide your face, and you wear them around like you're cooler than me. And you never say hey or remember my name, and it's probably cause you think you're cooler than me. You got your highbrow shoes on your feet, and you wear them around like it ain't but you don't know the way that you look when your steps make that much noise. Shh, I got you all figured out. You need everyone's eyes just to feel seen behind your makeup. Nobody knows who you even are. Who do you think that you are? If I could write you a song to make you fall in love, I would already have you up under my got you all figured out. You need everyone's eyes just to feel seen behind your makeup. Nobody knows who you even are. Who do you think that you are? 'Cause it sure seems you got no doubt. But we all see you got your head in the clouds. If I could write you a song to make you fall in love, I would already have you up under my arm. I used up all of my tricks. I hope that you like this, but you probably won't. You think you're cooler than me. You got designer shades just to hide your face, and you wear them around like you're cooler than me. And you never say hey or remember my name, and it's probably 'cause you think you're cooler than me.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will resume momentarily. Thank you.
The room is a spaceship, and you're an undiscovered planet. I push the hair out of my eyes. I pull the blanket around me. I bite my nails, scratch my shoulder. I peel the label off the bottle and tear it into tiny pieces. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. Maybe the phone will ring, and then I'll get to answer it. A momentary distraction. I can't predict your reaction to my touch. I could sit here all night, our knees almost touching, but not.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Stuart Rogers.
Okay, we're going to do a little exercise. Just raise your hands nice and high above your head and just push up as high as you can. I want to see some, there you go, quickly. You know what that is? That's the final stretch, you've made it. So let's get into the last two fireside chats. That was a terrible joke, I'm so sorry. So coming up on stage now, we have Matthias Keller, the Chief Scientist and SVP Technology at Kayak, and he will be introduced and interviewed by Matt Marshall, founder and CEO of Venturely. Please give them a warm welcome.
You know, Stuart's jokes get worse as you get close to the end of the event, but wait till he closes. So Matthias, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sorry about your voice.
On the last 25 minutes of my voice today.
It's
yes.
gotten worse over the course of today. He was fine at breakfast, but he's got kids in childcare, as I do, and so it's your month this term. It's my turn next month. Matthias, travel, right? This is actually the first time we've had travel on stage over the course of the 2 days. We had Uber represented, but in terms of it was just flight, hotel. It was the first industry when we started doing. 2 years ago, we started looking at bots, and Facebook had launched this platform. Travel was the most highly represented industry. It was the fastest to start adopting. And you were out there experimenting with some of these platforms, and you've been experimenting across all channels, right? So now Alexa, you were early last year, one of the first to start talking about it. So again, one of the first to experiment on Facebook as well. And it's kind of reflective of your company overall. We talked with OpenTable, so just context for the audience. OpenTable, Kayak are part of Bookings Holdings, and it's a $100 billion company that has in its DNA constant optimization. It's doubled in growth over the last couple of years, so significant growth, presumably because a lot of machine learning. We've talked with executives over the last couple of years from that company, and you're kind of a fleet-footed brand with a lot of ability to experiment. So just curious if you could give us some context for how you're seeing AI driving Kayak's business right now.
Yes, sure. So as you said, there is a lot of new technology work, and that work is important for us because mobile was one of these new technologies a long time ago. And what's also important is that us and many of the other players in the field, we all started very digital. So we don't have to do these kind of like retail becoming digital problems. We are just kind of like data first, so to speak. Mm-hmm. About the machine learning and AI, I keep saying that we have been doing machine learning for 10 years or actually more, because fundamentally how Kayak works is that 14 years ago, we started scraping web pages, normalize them, make it consumable to our users. And it's not scraping anymore, it's more like APIs. But it's also not just prices anymore, it's reviews and images from users and all kind of like information on neighborhoods, it's all that data, and it's just so much data that nobody can consume and that needs work to kind of like also normalize it in a sense. And what the most exciting or the most successful part here is that not only that we always started machine learning together with A/B experimentation to improve the top and the bottom line of the business, we also now see, like, if we would have talked last year, I would have said neural nets are more like we're trying to do something with them. Right now, we have multiple features on our site that are based on neural nets that we set up and that are now producing realistic, good results, such as content summarizations, content classifications, and all these things that initially was really like playing around, and now it's a fundamental part of the product.
Wow, so just within a year, neural nets has taken off from just speculation to actual part of the. Could you give us a sense of the results that they're yielding, or is it still early?
So the way where we use neural nets now, and this is really very important for us, is that we have like 1 million hotels that you can find on Kayak. If we add non-hotel accommodations, put another million to it. And each of these may have like 50 images, and for some hotels we get them from 10 different sources. And now all you want to know is like, how does a bathroom at this hotel look like? Yeah. And instead of you going through all these bad images of bathrooms and bad images of the golf court, we now use a neural net to tag these images to find what is the best angle of the image, what is the best image that we have, what is maybe the same image and it has just been misclassified. And the same applies, for instance, to user-generated reviews. I mean, when it initially started, it was, of course, going slow, but users giving reviews is also sort of an old hat by now, meaning there are so many of them. But now if we want to provide you all the reviews related to the location or if the rooms are quiet, that's also a machine learning application, because it's a very hard natural language programming problem. Because if you think of it, there are so many different ways how you can talk about the location, and I can just say like, it's close to the Salesforce tower, or I could say like it's in the city center, and it's kind of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. One of the areas you talked about also being excited was prediction. It sounded like you were using, you in the cloud with AWS, or you were talking about your bill going up for some of this work. Talk a little bit about price prediction, because we've heard of Faircast. I think they got acquired by Microsoft. Was it, what, 115 million a few years back, and then you had Hopper come out, and then Hopper was just with us in a breakout, going deep on their model with price prediction, right, and using machine learning for notifications. Can you talk a little bit about, because people don't really think about price prediction, or they don't think so when it comes to Kayak. Talk a little bit about what you're doing there, some of the traction you have.
So if you think of booking a flight, it's pretty much all about the price.
Yeah.
There is a level of convenience that you need, but at the end of the day, it's the price. And there are multiple products around that. Like we have these notifications that notify you when a price changed, went up or down.
Yeah.
And there is like for, I would also say roughly 10 years, there's this feature, and this is like the same Faircast model, that you run a search on our site, and it tells you if you should buy now or if it may be worthwhile waiting because the price is expected to go down. And this is something that we always had, and that the way how it works, it didn't require this massive amount of data. Also specifically because like many people usually search the same thing, so we have a lot of history, especially on the very popular routes. But the next step we want to go now is basically, we want to be able for, let's say, every route in the world, for every possible date, we want to be able to give you a price which may not be the exact price, but we want to give you a closely good enough price, and we want to give to that in like a sub-second.
Yeah.
And what we turn out doing there is that this is where the problem comes into place, that you need to have this freshly trained model because prices keep changing. There are a lot of things happening in there that we don't really understand because it's a lot of humans switching on and off different price tags. And this is where we see gradient boosters. They happen again this morning to come up.
Yeah.
It's this shiny new technology that everyone loves.
Right.
They already give us really tremendous results, but we now see even better results coming up using neural networks, which are doing really great on this kind of like random things happening we cannot model. And this is especially where neural nets really help when we just don't know what's happening.
Is that giving you kind of industry leadership in price prediction? I mean, who else has got a more sophisticated? Because my understanding from Hopper is it's more AI on the notification side. I don't want to speak for Hopper, but they've gotten a pretty good reputation for price prediction, but largely for notification. I'm just wondering, you've been doing it for so long, now you're applying neural nets and these new approaches. Are you confident about being the industry leader?
Hopefully. I mean, if we talk about price prediction, so first of all, I think we have to be fair that the perfect crystal ball is not existing. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the quality of predictions, there are many different ways how you measure it. Are you talking about hitting the right direction? Are you talking about hitting it within $1, within $5, within $10, and all that? And there is no standard how to measure that. Our belief how we measure is that we have the best solution out there. Other competitors may say that their way of measurement has them being the best. But nevertheless, this is all based on previous generation, and I'm very confident that the next generation is not only going to drive much more accurate and much more actionable price predictions, it's also really going to help users in many different problems, like you can travel any weekend and you don't care, but you don't want to run 8 different weekend searches. You just want to have this tool telling you really quick, this is the best weekend you should go. And all kind of variations that suddenly get possible, like Google with their purchase of ITA, they have the advantage that they know every price on earth.
Right.
So they can do very easy things like saying this other airport is cheaper, a day later is cheaper as well. And while we didn't buy ITA, we are now building up AI that gives us the same purpose of, without having to get the actual price, mm-hmm. having a good estimate of the price, being able to tell you maybe you should stay a day longer because you're going to save $100.
Great. So one of the things we talked about in prep was your excitement around the Alexa work that you're doing, and also some Siri work. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of those platforms as distribution tools?
Yeah, so I think about 2 years ago, we started working with chatbots and voice platforms. And admittingly, and I think this is what everyone did, it was really about finding out what sticks and what works. So we had a lot of learnings from that, and then there are also the new opportunities coming up. So starting with the learnings is that we realized that we can provide the most value on these platforms if they are supporting the user in reaching their travel goals more than immediately shopping something. It is really, our current vision is that it's a ubiquitous conversation with your travel plans. It can be before you book, you may just kind of like trying to find out what you're trying to do. It can be after you book, you want to know when you want to leave or where your plane is. And a couple of interesting products we have there that are super exciting is that one, we just about 4 months ago launched flight tracker notifications on Alexa, which is basically you telling Alexa you want to be notified 30 minutes before a certain plane lands. And what I like about that is that for me, this is a third dimension of voice computing. Because like we have the first dimension of control, switch on some lights, turn on the temperature. We have a second dimension of pulling information, like what's the weather. But this is now the third dimension of asking for information that is not available right now because it's not relevant right now, and having a system behind the scene, like this agent, looking for our plane and notifying us right now when the event happened. So this is a third dimension for us. The other exciting thing, which is not yet available but will launch in fall together with iOS 12, is that Apple now finally opened up Siri for basically every app developer in a way that we can define so-called shortcuts. This will give us the way that a lot of our users use our Trips application during their travel, because it tells them their plane is delayed, which gate they have to go, what the address of the hotel is. And we will now be able to do that on voice without having to open our app, which is really phenomenal, because I think together also with all the other app developers going on that technology, it will probably be very common that you're going to get a lot of things done together with Siri. And we are very excited that we are part of the first wave of getting things done on Siri.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Amazon and Siri, which actually hasn't come up an amazing amount at this event, surprisingly. But you are downplaying Google, and presumably it's because of their play in ITA. Could you talk a little bit about Google Assistant as a distribution tool? You essentially just bypassing it, it's just not interesting, or are you going to play there?
It is very different. So whenever I look at Google, I look at 20 Googles, and there are many of them that are really strong partners of ours. We are participating in the Google Ads for hotels.
Right.
We are using a lot of open source technology. They're pushing like TensorFlow for neural nets. We are working together with them on SEO optimization, on mobile site optimization. And out of these 20, there is one of them that's doing travel.
Yeah.
And the way how we look at it is that, to be fair, they have an interesting access to intent and access that we will never have, which is the front door of the internet.
Yeah.
But there is still a lot of distinctive product features that want me keep using Kayak, which is that I know that there is more comprehensiveness. Even if there's like some small flight provider in Brazil, we are going to work with them.
Yeah.
If there is some small low-cost carrier in Spain, we are going to work with them. If there is, we spend much more effort in really integrating these hundreds of sites that we search. It's not just marketing, it's really hundreds of sites that we search.
Yeah.
And I also think that there has to be something to be said about being an industry company. There's definitely also an interesting UI and UX race between Kayak and Google, and I would argue that they are our strongest competitor in the United States in flights. So far, I really see it also as it's a very strong partner, and then there's this one unit that does a product that is somehow differentiated to us, and I prefer ours.
Yeah. Yeah. How significant is the U.S. market? I mean, is this?
It is still the majority for Kayak. I don't have any split. It is also changing every time where we grow. The fastest growth is definitely outside of the U.S.
Yeah.
But definitely Kayak started as a U.S. company, and this is where the majority of the business is.
So we had a Samsung executive yesterday talk about, I don't know if you were there for his conversation, but the goalkeeper analogy, which we've repeated maybe once too many times. But just there's a tendency of companies to be the goalkeeper that backs away from that charging striker because the ball's coming at you plus maybe 100, 150 pounds. And really, it's the reverse, that you've actually got to go charge and narrow the angle. given that you're trying to be that front place for search, top of the funnels, and now Google has that aggressive play there. What's your version of that charge? I guess I'm hearing that you have a lot of these plays. Is there one that represents that charge forward in terms of AI applications, or is there no one play?
I think we have multiple plays, and so the first play is that we are putting a lot of focus on the UI and UX in our products, and that we want to have the best travel UI out there. We are probably not going to reach them in speed anytime soon.
Yeah.
Or well, maybe with at least our AI predictions. But there is a fair race in the UX and the UI. We definitely are hyper-focused on just travel, which also allows us to do really applications that are, it's not all about selling the ticket. There is so much more. There is the trip planning. We just also recently launched it. It's not AI, but it's a tool called Trip Huddle, where basically you invite your friends on planning a trip together. Like, where do you want to go? When do we want to go? You can paste in and drop in some hotels, and like a lot of people travel in groups, and so we take the time to work on these type of problems. And while I would say that the Google product is mostly really focused on selling tickets, we are really focused on the whole problem of how do I solve travel? What's the whole experience? If things go sideways, you could even call us. And
Yeah.
This is, I think, very different, and this makes it like a company that is just in travel. And AI is going to be, it's one race. I don't know to what extent Google Travel uses AI. For us, it is very important, and it's for us also important to give the right information in front of users so that they come to us because they find the right information there.
Yeah, you were expressing quite a bit of excitement around the voice plus screen interface. And ironically, or maybe not, Scott Huffman opened the conference talking about his excitement for voice plus screen. So maybe it's not a zero-sum game. Maybe you're both going to benefit. But can you talk a little bit about your own excitement? And you talked about large screens too, as opposed to, say, the mobile screen, which most of us think about when we're talking about these things. Can you talk a little bit about where you're seeing voice plus screen?
Definitely. So I mean, it started with Amazon coming up with Echo Show, which is right now still more of a premium device, and
Right.
and definitely I think most people still buy the Echo Dot or like the screenless device. But now just recently we did an optimization of our kayak skill on the Fire TV Cube, which brings the skill on a 50-inch screen, and together with little remote control, and it's talking, tapping, and when we looked at that, and when we looked at our prototypes, we realized this is how flight booking is going to work. And there is a lot of information you need, all these numbers and stopovers, and how long do I have time for the layover, which you can't really bring over in voice.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a good experience. It's actually already challenging to deal with all that on the phone.
Yeah.
But these large screens, they're really going to be perfect for that. And the other angle I look at is that, so there's having more space for commerce tend to happen. But the other angle I really look also at is that I'm hoping that TVs are going to become this kind of like personal home dashboards, have all my information, buy the milk, pick up the kids. And maybe there will also be some space to make sure that there is a relevant information in travel, sort of like plane is going to arrive in 30 minutes, prices just dropped. And what's also exciting me here is that it's not just the space of the screens. Screens are also in many ways very passive often. Like you don't have to really activate them, they're just running.
Yeah.
And that's, I think this kind of like passive consumption of information is also going to be very helpful in a continuous interaction with travel.
Well, and the interaction with the large screen, is that mostly voice, or is there some other interface?
So if you get a Fire TV right now,
Thanks,
Fire TV Cube right now from Amazon, there is a little remote control, so you can talk to it, you can navigate it, and yes, so like basically it's tapping and talking.
Yeah. So we have some time for questions. Anybody want to ask a question for Matthias? If you do, raise your hand and wait for the microphone.
So I'm curious about user segmentation. And I've been wondering, is it better to just sort of have many different segments, or to simply consider each person their own segment? And curious your thoughts on that.
Well, we had this morning Joseph from OpenTable saying that if you are a heavy user, you will have dozens of reservations. I would say if you are a heavy user on Kayak, you have a one-digit number of flights. Well, there are probably also some with dozens, but what I'm saying is like booking a flight is not watching Netflix. So the single person segmentation has technical limits. From this perspective, it makes much more sense to start with higher level segments like business traveler versus personal traveler, large group versus small group, which then allows you to already make decisions such as, well, that's a large group going for a very long time. They may find non-hotel accommodation more interesting hotel accommodation. Or we know that a lot of people from Boston, for some reason, they go to Nantucket. So if I see another user from Nantucket, it can't be a bad recommendation doing this. But it's a lot of, I would say, still anonymous data that is more in bigger segments, just for the reason that if you look at bookings alone, there is only a few people who probably travel for work will do like 10 or more trips a year.
John?
First of all, thanks for talking. I mean, sounds like you're going through quite a bit right there, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'm pretty interested in what you had to say about doing some travel planning while you're looking at like a 50-inch screen and talking to it and seeing. I think that's really, really critical, the interplay between voice and visual. And I know you mentioned you can integrate with Alexa, you can integrate with Siri in ways, but what about inside your own app? It'd be nice to be able to tell the app, I want to go here, there, for such and such long time, stay here, stay there, whatever. See what's happening, make changes on the fly with your finger. And you've got voice happening, visual happening, tapping happening. It's a multimodal experience. It could be really, really rich. You can do stuff like that with SoundCloud, for instance. It makes your own Alexa, basically. Any thoughts on that?
So first thought I have, it's a great question. And so the first thought I have is that when we in the early days experimented with users using voice to navigate our site, it didn't really pick up. And the reason was that back in the day, that was like 2 years ago, it didn't really make sense that you get your phone, unlock it, open an app, and then you start talking to it. The only interaction really has to happen on a lock screen, which is now what's going to happen with Siri. But it seems that the modality that users want to be in is either like, ideally I just want to talk because I'm mobile running around, or I have the time to use the screen. But like talking to a small screen doesn't seem to be too appealing. So from that perspective, for the voice interaction, I would argue you have to have at least 10, 15 inch for it to make sense. And it also wouldn't be my computer. I don't, like if you look at Cortana, I don't think that a lot of people use it. But on a big screen, it suddenly starts to make sense. And this is where I can see such interaction happening, because if you look at it, and I'm not saying that we have that today, but if you look at it, if you start this exploration on your TV, you can suddenly add video, you can add audio, you have enough space to kind of like for all your ideas. It's high definition. And then you can have not only this multimodal, but also this very rich content experience that really helps you. Like, okay, you say I should go to Fiji, so how does Fiji look like? And what do other people say about Fiji? And you know, maybe at some point there is a VR tour about Fiji, but we also just tested. We have a VR app out there now where you can look at Venice and Kathmandu, and right now it's clunky because like you need to wear the goggle, but it's very interesting actually to try before you buy, so to speak. And these multimodal experience on large screens, they could make that happen in a more casual, easier way, I think.
I had a question about, there has been a lot of conversation around applied techniques in AI. we see, so for example, there was a mention in one of the conversations that the biggest breakthrough was, for example, neural networks becoming available to the general public. Can we expect those sort of things from new organizations, or is it always going to be bigger organizations bringing this to the market and the rest of them just sort of depending on them to come with the next breakthrough? And if that is the case, how do the smaller organizations compete with the bigger organizations in AI?
That's a great question. I mean, you're right that that the big companies, they are using this technology definitely to have advantages in technologies like self-driving cars. I think that's a big battle. And luckily, they haven't been hyper-focused on travel yet. I'm not sure if the solution is to say, like, we have to also start developing more of these methodologies. I think it's not very practical because there's also a lot of investment around this. I'm hoping that there's maybe this, there's a general discourse around AI and how can we use it, how can't we use it. Maybe it should be an outcome of this as well, that we talk about, that maybe you shouldn't be able to keep these things in your back pocket. Otherwise, there may definitely be a significant advantage at some point of one of the 3-4 big players.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. We're also out of words, I think, for Matthias's voice. So it's a good time to end here. Matthias, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well done, Matthias, for making it through that with the voice. So you are into the last fireside chat. Would love to welcome on stage John Wickline, Senior Director of Information Management at Gogo, and he will be interviewed by Jana Eggers, CEO of Neuralogix. Please give them a warm, warm welcome.
So we are in the awesome position of being between these guys and drinks.
This is true. This is true.
So, but we're also in a great position because you guys just talked about booking flights, and what we're going to talk about is the most important part of your flight experience, which is internet access. You all know who Gogo is? People who's used in-flight internet? Yeah, most people have. So John is responsible for machine learning, data analytics at Gogo. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that means to Gogo?
Sure. So Gogo focuses on a lot of different things, right, relative to the in-flight experience. And a little bit about Gogo, just to give a little more background. Obviously, you guys are familiar with us. From the perspective of in-flight connectivity, we also provide other products, Gogo Vision, which is TV and movies, streaming television now as well, IPTV, all on your personal electronic devices. So for Gogo, a lot of what we focus on is obviously structured data. We have a lot of structured data like most corporations, but we have a large amount of unstructured data. In some companies, you'll note that they can run most of their business off of structured data, and the unstructured data just gives them additional insights. Gogo is a little bit more unique in that the unstructured data is essentially a critical part of the information we need to assess the operations of the service, et cetera. So for us, it's definitely the two types of data go hand in hand. And so a lot of our focus has been on, at least the last couple of years, is essentially getting all that data into one common place and making it easy to enable analytics along with machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera.
Yeah, so let's go back those 2 years. So you've just done a migration over those last 2 years to AWS to help enable some of the AI that we'll also talk about a bit. But let's go back those 2 years and talk about what made you even start.
Sure. So a little history. So we started out with our structured data essentially in a SQL Server environment. And then we had a log file data that we had to deal with. And at the time, this is probably about 5 years or so ago, one of the best ways we had to deal with it, at least that we developed, was to have Perl scripts that basically extract and parse out large volumes of this unstructured data, and we write it into this massive Oracle database. And then Hadoop technology came out, and we said, okay, good, let's move to Hadoop. Everything's in a file system now, and so we're like, very excited about that. We can deal with larger volumes of data, we can expand, et cetera, and we're like, yay, Hadoop. And then we realized that part of the challenge we had is that we need to see our structured data next to our unstructured data. And I'll give you an example. So let's say I have a flight, and I want to know everything that's going on that flight. I want to know how many sessions there are, in-flight connectivity sessions, how many video views there are, how much we have in sales, are there chats, how many visits do we have to the actual portal page. All of that is structured data. If I wanted to know, at least for GoGo, if I wanted to know what was the system availability and the latency, and the ping times and the health of the service, et cetera, that is essentially a lot of it, and especially once we get deeper into it, is in the unstructured data. So we had to go over here to our Hadoop cluster to get the unstructured, here to our SQL Server environment to get the structured, and you either had to merge them locally in the reporting layer, or you could take an aggregate from the Hadoop layer and then push it over into your database and then SQL Server database and do that. So that was the fundamental problem we had. So the next thing we did was we migrated to AWS and used S3, Simple Storage Service, to essentially combine all the data into one environment. And we did this in connection with GoGo's larger move to the cloud, with the rest of IT initiated, and we gladly went ahead and followed. And so now we essentially have all the data in one nice common place, and then we can do our analytics, data science, et cetera, just on that set of data.
So let's talk about some of those use cases, because I do think it was very interesting as we talked before this, how much you have to deal with that. You say unstructured data, and it sort of sounds like, oh, it's always the same kind, but you have equipment that you have to deal with, and the different carriers that you have to deal with. So you're managing different partners, not just, hey, there's electricity we have to turn on. You have a lot of different factors that you're trying to sort through.
Correct. A very good point. The fun thing, and I will say this, a little plug for working at GoGo. The fun thing about GoGo, and I came from a telecom background before, but the fun thing about GoGo is it's multiple industries in one. It's telecom, cellular, it's satellite communications, it's aviation, and it's a little bit e-commerce all in one. And so it creates a fun environment, but it means you do, to your point, have a large number of data sources. And what's interesting is when you look at the operational data that we're talking about, part of the information is you need to understand how the health of the aircraft is as it flies across the sky. And the best way to get the information is through the link that we provide ourselves and to our customers. And so we're very careful to only send a very small amount of information across the link that the customers leverage as well. And this is basically light ping information. This tells us if the service is up and running or not. But we collect a much larger volume of data. All of the GoGo-equipped aircraft have a server that sits on board, and it contains a myriad of information. I'll use fan speed as an example. So we have a server that sits in the aircraft that provides all the services. And it's like any server, it gets hot, so it has to have a fan to cool it. And so one of the variables that we store is fan speed. And that can be used to identify some cases where if the fan starts to slow down, the server may be getting older, maybe getting hotter, let's do some preventive maintenance. The reason I cite this example is this is a good example of data that we collect, but we don't need to send down to the ground every 5 seconds because we don't care what the fan speed was every inch along the way. But we do offload it once we get to the ground. So the aircraft lands, we use a terrestrial modem, we use cellular terrestrial network to offload that data, those large log files, and then do that initial analysis. And we have many use cases specifically for that data to help drive operational performance around the equipment on the aircraft and what steps we want to take with those.
And I think that's one of the interesting aspect is the quality of service, right? And you all have to deal with so many different factors and many factors you don't control.
Correct.
Like that airplane could be hot for a reason that has nothing to do with you, and the fan speed matters, but you have to take into account, well, that's not really my equipment, that just happened on that one flight.
Correct.
And so that's one of the things that you're looking at, and from my understanding from what you said, and if you could tell us a little bit more about that for the machine learning, is you were looking at when do we pull equipment, because that interrupts your customers.
Correct, yeah, and just to finish off your point about various factors, weather is another example of factors. So, I know we've seen some cases where you're in a heavy, heavy tropical climate with a lot of rainstorms, we will get some interference with satellite signals. And these are things we've had to work through as well. But when we talk about equipment, and I'll just kind of transition into some machine learning. So let's take a problem. So we have a server that sits aboard an aircraft. We have a lot of other hardware and equipment as well, antenna, WAPs, wiring, a bunch of other aspects as well. But let's just talk about the server as an example. So today, let's say that that server is having a problem. It reset a couple times, and it impacted some customer performance. So we have an operations personnel who gets information on that and then basically makes a decision. And the decision is, do I pull the server and swap it out with a new replacement? Do I let it go and it fixes itself when it reboots potentially overnight or between flights? And so today, we've found that more often than we'd like in some cases, we'll wind up pulling that equipment, which then involves cost because you have to actually have someone pull it. You have to take it back to a facility, and you have to diagnose the actual hardware. And we've had some cases where we've said, look, we pulled the equipment and it works fine. That wasn't the problem, must be something else. And so what we wanted to do was leverage data to get a much better sense of what's going on and have a nice, more appropriate decision tree for the individual operations folks to go through and then make their assessments. And so what we've done, now that we have all this data in one place, is we've essentially set up a Bayesian network. By show of hands, Bayesian network. Okay, that's fine, because 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't be raising my hand to know what a Bayesian network is either. So as a disclaimer too, my background isn't necessarily as strong on the data science side. It's more in the data integration, data engineering, et cetera. So essentially, with this Bayesian network, it looks at a series of variables. And what we've done is we've taken our historical data over time, and we've said, what factors are most likely to be predictors of failure of equipment, and then what actually tells us that either A, we should pull the box that's on the aircraft and replace it with something else, or B, let it go, let it reset, or C, it's some other piece of equipment. And so we have a whole variety of data. System availability of the service. How many users were there? What was the latency of the service at the time? How is the communication between the WAPs and the aircraft and the server itself? Where was the aircraft flying? What was the ambient air temperature, et cetera? And so we can take all this information and essentially we use it to create a decision tree for folks on the ground who then say, okay, I have this event that's occurred on this aircraft, on this particular server, and here are the steps that I should take based off of this machine learning algorithm. And so that's the first part. And then the second part is, and the machine learning part really is, we then, let's say we've now been running this machine learning algorithm for a while, we then look at the results. So if the instances where it says pull the box and take a look at it, and we look at those boxes and it turns out that there's nothing wrong with these boxes, then essentially that input goes back into the Bayesian network and informs it to change its conditional variable weighting so it doesn't actually weight those factors as much because it was clearly wrong in those particular cases. And the inverse would be true as well. And so for us, this opens up a huge range of possibilities and how we can more effectively troubleshoot the rare equipment failures that we do have. So whether they be services on the aircraft, an antenna, WAPs, which are on board the aircraft, or one of the many other physical hardware components.
So as you talked about that, you talked about trying different ways of approaching the problem and seeing which. How did you all think about that, or did you think about that with the migration to AWS? I mean, I know you said your IT department was going to AWS, so that made it easier. Right. But did you worry, wow, if we got there, we wouldn't have tools that we'd have maybe at one of the other cloud providers? Yeah,
no, it's a good question. So I will say, we have a lot of decisions, at least in my area, that we have to make, and I'm sure other parts of the organization. But for us, the biggest advantage of being more on the data warehouse side is we tend to be in the tail end of the decisioning on IT, in the sense that we prefer to be near our data sources. And the reality is that's just where we generally like to co-locate. Can't be near all of them, but we generally want to be near many. And we actually had a fairly forward-thinking senior vice president of IT at the time who pushed us more the cloud direction. And he had some experience with AWS. I wasn't actually privy to more the specific decisioning behind AWS versus, say, an Azure or a Google Cloud. But I will say that we're fairly happy with what we've done. to move to them. We feel like the support level is very high. And Google Cloud and Azure have very good offerings as well. We just haven't fully explored those at this point in time. But for us, once we got to AWS, the ability to have to leverage their S3 environment to have data co-located. We leverage Kinesis to handle large data and bundle it into more manageable chunks as well. It's been very effective for us. And then there's the inherent benefits having a cloud-based provider. I mean, if I had, over my career prior to into the cloud, at least once a month, something had happened somewhere in infrastructure with a Unix upgrade or a server went down or a storage failure or something along those lines. So just the uptime alone of going to the cloud, whether it be in AWS, Azure, or anyone else, has been very, very effective for us.
So going to the cloud, bringing all the data together, and this has come up several times during the conference with other folks, is talking some about governance and the access, because in some senses there was a fair amount of that data before that was ring-fenced and that it was only on one person's machine. Sure. They were the ones who accessed those log files and did that. Now more people have access. You have GDPR, and so do you want to talk about some of that and how that's made you think about what you try to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about on the GDPR side specifically and then the data governance side. So for us, so for GDPR, obviously the organization has a lot of requirements that they can and can't do with certain aspects of the data. You have a right to be forgotten, for instance, and there's various parts of IT that have handled that. On my particular area on the data side, we're much more concerned about once we have data in the data warehouse, we have to obscure it properly, right? And so for those who operate more in the data-specific space, some of the challenges you have, and I should mention we have a dimensional data warehouse, so you have certain dimensions that go across many things. And so one of them that's very useful is the MAC ID, for instance. So each device has a physical MAC ID. And so we're in a situation now where internally we felt like, based on GDPR guidelines, we can't really store the MAC ID, and you can't really use it. And so we have to hash that. But some of the challenge is that if you hash and salt MAC IDs across the board, then you can't join between your data structures because you can't identify the same MAC from one environment to the next. And so we had to take a different approach to deal with that. So it's, from a data side, the funny thing about GDPR is you look at it and you say, like, it's, there's not much value that we derive from implementing GDPR. It's just something that you legally have to do. And obviously, it's in the customer's long-term best interests. Otherwise, the EU wouldn't have adopted it, certainly. But it did present a challenge on our side, and it's something we worked through. But for the most of the part, the focus for us was more on just obscuration of data, and then obviously in other parts of IT, establishing the mechanisms to enable folks to be forgotten.
So I just learned, actually, that GoGo, your inaugural internet flight was just a couple of days ago. I think it was August 20th.
Yes.
10 years ago. It's hard to imagine, right? That was, in some senses, I was like, wow, 10 years seems so long. And others, I was like, wow, it's only been 10 years. So I think that's, the internet warps our mind in that sense. But I'm curious, how far back, that's been another discussion that I've heard from people. Some people said, I just started and went forward with the data that I had, and you guys have so much. Did you think about that? Did you think about, do we go back 8 years and look at data? Do we just stay with the last 2?
It's a good question. And if you look at, particularly in our area, the volumes of data growth are exponential. So if I look back in, 2018 may have as much data as the prior 7 years combined, right? So it just keeps going exponential. So when we look at our modeling, we definitely go back quite a ways. What's interesting to GoGo is seasonality as well, weather events. So obviously winters and summers and other events have different impacts on the service. So in order to get a good statistically significant sample to look at, you have to go back many, many years in some cases. And there's, like you said, there's a lot of variables. So we have various technologies we use to deliver service. Some is cellular, some is satellite, different configurations of aircraft, both on the business aviation side, which we haven't talked about too much, and on the commercial aviation side as well. So there's a lot of variables to look at. So definitely we'd like to go back as far as possible. But one thing we're also starting to look at too is, and going to the cloud, it gives you this visibility of how much you're spending on certain things. And like many organizations have gone to the cloud, we're very excited we go to the cloud. And then after a while, like, okay, let's look at Cloud Health, which is AWS's Cloud Health product that tells you about the various ways you're spending money. And we're like, why are we spending so much money to store data? And we look at all this stuff, and then we start to ask ourselves, is it worth keeping that 2012, 2013 data in S3 and paying the monthly fees associated with it? Is it that valuable for the analysis? And by the way, as soon as you talk to the data scientists, they're like, yes, of course it is. Leave me alone. Right. Do not bother me with these concerns.
Storage is cheap.
Storage is cheap, right? And then you're like, that's nice, but it does add up. And the more you run these queries, you hit the S3 API cost as well. Please stop doing that so often. So from a data manager side, you have a different perspective than data scientist. But certainly we work together and ensure that we're able to move the organization forward.
So speaking of size of data, and you've mentioned weather a few times, there's also, and this has come up several times again too, about augmenting data. So do you get the weather data from the plane, and so you don't have to worry about augmenting it, or do you have other places where you have to bring in data from outside?
That's an excellent question, and it's one that we're actually just talking about right now. So some information you do get from aircraft. It depends on the particular aircraft and the type of configuration they have, and so we do have that information. Some of it you get from third-party providers. So sometimes you're going to want to know weather on the ground. So increasingly, Gogo has an offering with certain partners where we provide gate-to-gate service. So traditionally, in our cellular-based network, and probably the beginning stages of our satellite network, you're only allowed to enable the IFC, the in-flight connectivity service, above 10,000 feet. Many airlines now in the US as well allows gate-to-gate service. So using Gogo as an example, if you fly on Delta using their 2KU service, a large number of their flights are gate-to-gate enabled. So you can leverage the service at the gate and up in the air as well. So getting weather information at airports is also very helpful to us as well, because certainly with the antennas atop the aircraft, if you have large amounts of weather interference, it could impact the signal. And so we want to understand the impact of that. So third-party weather data, something we do have. We do get some from the aircraft as well, and always looking to expand upon that.
Is there other augmenting data that you guys think about that's important?
It's funny. So there are some things we've talked about. To be honest, so much of the focus and the low-hanging fruit for us is just leveraging our own data even further to help drive value, which is probably a use case that many folks in the audience see as well, I'm sure.
That's actually one of the reasons why I asked you is that I always tell our customers, they talk about, oh, we don't have enough data. I'm like, I promise you have enough data. Yeah. But you're not using what you have, and so people aren't used to thinking of it in the way of, look how much we can pull out. They just look at the log file, and I'm like, there's like 20 different ways to look at that log file.
Absolutely. I mean, and just we could spend the next 10 years just looking at the data we have right now. So
we're gonna let you guys drink before 10 years.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
So yeah, no, it's definitely we're much more focused on our data, but when needed, we will augment, obviously.
Great. I think we'll break for questions, and you guys don't be shy just because there's drinks waiting, like we said. Did I mention the drinks waiting? But if you can raise your hand and wait for the microphone, it helps make sure that we have the questions recorded as well. Any questions? People are ready just to get on your flight, and we've got a question. Thank you.
Curious, in your move to AWS, did you move to serverless and Lambda and DynamoDB, or is it server-based?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of a quick overview of architecture. So we leverage, most of what we leverage is EMR EC2 clusters, so all virtual clusters, to essentially do a lot of the data integration. We use Lambda functions to ingest. In some cases, if we can't figure out why it takes us more than 5 minutes to extract the data, because Lambda functions only allow a certain amount of time, we'll set up an EC2 cluster and just pull the data in. We have Kinesis running through to bundle the data into more manageable chunks. We use Dynamo more for automated balance and control, so we understand when the data comes in, and we use it also to we use Airflow for orchestration to essentially trigger off of what gets updated in Dynamo, and then we just store it in S3. So that's essentially our configuration. The unstructured data comes a little bit differently than the structured data and how we handle it. We use more Scala parsers to parse the data. On the data integration side, we use more PySpark for data integration specifically. I hope that answers your question. I went a little bit deeper. Once you started asking an architecture question, I just started talking. So, yeah.
Do we we have any other questions? So I'm just going to go back and I'll finish it and then we can all run to drinks, I promise. But I am, you know, a lot of people here are in marketing, and that quality of service is something, you know, I will say personally, I'm relieved when I get on a flight with GoGo. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing there. How do you, you know, I understand how you can get into the, you know, gosh, if we have to switch this out, these people are going to be angry and we better do it when it really needs to. How do you get your team really thinking about the customer, whether that's the airline or the end user? How do you bring that into your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely starts from the top. So, you know, at GoGo, we've had a renewed emphasis, particularly on operational focus to ensure the highest level of service available. And it's funny, you know, sitting within the data space, I see the numbers routinely. Even yesterday, I looked and the system availability was in the very high 90s, which is fantastic. And so, essentially for us, it's just setting certain things as the highest requirements, which is, you know, that the system is highly available, that it's fast, and that it provides a high level of service. Particularly with rolling out our new 2KU technology, which also provides a higher level of bandwidth to the aircraft. You can do a lot more activities. Streaming is very easily done. You can stream television now as well. You can handle a much larger volume of user load than we would have traditionally under our cellular network. So with that focus, we you know, we're able to keep the customers happy.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you.
Okay, so that is Transform. Thank you all so much for being with us the last 2 days. It's been really quite incredible and amazing. We do have to thank our sponsors one more time, because without them, we could not possibly have done this. So our platinum sponsor, Samsung. Oh, look, we've got a pointer running across the screen there. That's rather magical. Can we get the sponsor slide up for us, please? I'm just going to pause for one moment. Shall I do a dance? No. We don't do dances. So thank you to all of our sponsors. They've been absolutely wonderful. We couldn't do this without them. We have a happy hour reception. Platinum sponsor Samsung, they will be sponsoring the happy hour reception. We've got WorldPay, IBM, HelpShift, Pullstring, TieInflect, Eva, Link, and Allegion. We do also want to draw your attention to the fact that we will be back here in October. In October, we will be running VB Summit. Now, if this show was about taking AI from a very broad perspective, maybe, you know, standing outside I don't know, a group of houses and just looking at them. I think we best describe VB Summit as kind of maybe taking a telescope and looking through someone's window. It's going to be really, really deep, much, much deeper. Thank you for laughing at that joke, sir. It's very kind of you. So please, 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 go check it out. Early bird tickets are now on sale, 30% off. It's VP level and above. It's going to be very small invite in terms of, you know, getting really good quality people there, just like your good selves. So please go check it out. VP Summit, October 21, 22, Mill Valley. I will be your jovial MC for that, but don't let that dissuade you from buying a ticket. So, without further ado, let's go and enjoy happy hour, have a drink, enjoy ourselves, do some more networking, your last chance to talk to the vendors, and that was that. I have to do one more thing, and I do just want a big round of applause from all of you. There's a lot of people who have put a huge amount of effort into putting this show together, and they all deserve a huge round of applause. So thank you to all the staff at VentureBeat, all the people who help us with putting this show together. It's been absolutely stunning. Thank you very much. And, oh, IBM is the sponsor. IBM is the sponsor of the happy hour. Thank you, Matt, for correcting me. Back when I was in sales, Matt, you know, we used to have a phrase which was that if you knew God, IBM knew God's dad and had already taken him out for drinks. And so we're taking everybody out for drinks on IBM's buck. That's fantastic. Thank you, IBM, for continuing that. And also, one more round of applause, and this one is for yourselves, because you've been amazing and awesome, and you've been a fantastic audience. And if I get a bad audience at a new show, I'm just going to pay you all to come with me. You've been so incredible. So thank you all very much. That was Transform. Let's go and have a drink. Thank you.